The message came in at 8:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not early enough to be urgent, not late enough to be drunk. We don't trust you anymore. No greeting, no explanation, no punctuation at the end, like he didn't even need to finish the thought. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for my body to react the way bodies are supposed to react when something foundational cracks. There was no sharp pain, no heat, just a slow, familiar tightening in my chest, like a seatbelt pulling snug before impact. I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, coffee going untouched. Outside, a garbage truck groaned its way down the street, the sound grinding and ordinary. That was the worst part. The world didn't stop. Nothing even flinched. I read the message again, then a third time. We don't trust you anymore. Not I. We. He never spoke for himself when it mattered. He always hid behind the plural, like responsibility was a committee decision. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. A dozen possible defenses flashed through my mind. Facts, timelines, receipts, the things I'd learned over a lifetime of trying to prove I was safe to love. I could have explained where I was that night, why the money moved the way it did, how none of this made sense if they actually looked at it instead of feeling their way through it. But I didn't send any of that. Instead, I typed one word. Understood. I hit send before I could rethink it. The bubble disappeared, the message delivered, and just like that, the role I'd been playing my entire life snapped into focus. I wasn't the daughter who messed up. I was the daughter they never fully believed in. That distinction matters. I grew up learning how to sound honest, not be honest, sound honest. There's a difference when you're raised in a house where trust is conditional and love comes with fine print. My father liked order, clean lines, predictable outcomes. He loved us best when we behaved like investments instead of people. My mother liked peace. She avoided conflict the way some people avoid mirrors, by never standing still enough to see themselves clearly. And then there was my brother. Evan was certainty wrapped in confidence. He never hesitated, never second-guessed. He said things like he expected them to land correctly the first time. When he messed up, it was a phase. When I did, it was a pattern. By the time we were teenagers, the difference was already baked in. If Evan came home late, my father laughed and said, "Boys will test boundaries." If I did, he asked, "Who were you with?" like the danger lived inside me. I learned early that trust in our family wasn't built, it was assigned, and once assigned, it was rarely questioned, unless you were me. The first time I noticed it, I was 12. I'd saved birthday money in a shoebox under my bed. When I went to add to it, half of it was gone. I told my mother. She sighed, distracted, and said maybe I miscounted. Later that night, I heard my parents whispering in their bedroom. My name floated down the hall, thin and sharp. "She's always been forgetful," my father said. I stood there, frozen, realizing something important for the first time. If money disappeared, it wouldn't be someone stealing from me. It would be me losing it. That logic followed me into adulthood. If something went wrong, I was the variable. If something went missing, I was the question mark. If something felt off, I was the easiest explanation. So when the text came, it didn't feel random, it felt earned. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because this was always where the story was heading. Still, the finality of it knocked the air out of me. Trust isn't just belief, it's access. And that message wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. It meant locked doors, closed conversations, decisions made without me and about me at the same time. By noon, my mother still hadn't called. She wouldn't. She never intervened first. She waited to see which way the wind was blowing, then adjusted herself accordingly. At 2:17 p.m., Evan texted, "Dad's upset. You should explain yourself." There it was. Not "what happened," not "are you okay," just another subtle assignment of guilt. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I let silence do the talking. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction from the last 6 months. The sudden coldness, the way my father stopped sharing details, the way my mother's voice tightened when money came up, The way Evan had started double-checking things he never questioned before. I saw it clearly now. They weren't reacting, they were preparing, and whatever story they were building, I had already been cast. The worst part wasn't the accusation, it was the realization that they'd been waiting for a reason not to trust me, like trust was their default setting, and belief was the exception I'd finally exhausted. I turned onto my side, the room heavy with old air, and felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not anger, distance. The next morning, my phone was quiet. No follow-up, no clarification, no invitation to fix anything, just the absence where family used to be. I made coffee, took a shower, got dressed. Life moved forward like nothing had changed, but something had. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't begging to be understood by people who had already decided who I was. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn trust from people who'd never actually given it. I replied, understood, and meant something they never expected. I understood exactly what they were doing, and I was done being confused.
After the message, nothing exploded. That's what surprised me most. No family meeting, no confrontation, no dramatic phone calls where someone finally said the quiet part out loud. Just a subtle reorganization of the world, one I was clearly no longer at the center of. That's how my family always punished, not with rage, with exclusion. I noticed it first in the smallest ways. Group chats went quiet when I replied. Plans were made without me and explained later as accidents. My mother started answering my questions with vague half-sentences, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing out loud and having it used against her. My father didn't text again, not once, and that silence told me more than the message ever could. I started paying attention the way you do when you finally accept that something is wrong, not in a paranoid way, not looking to prove a theory, but alert, awake, done pretending things were normal. It turned out I had missed a lot while I was busy trying to be good. There were the comments, for one, casual, almost careless. At dinner one night, my parents' house, the same oak table I grew up at, my father mentioned how hard it is to know who you can rely on these days. His eyes didn't meet mine. They flicked toward my plate, then away. My mother reached for the salt like it was urgent. Evan didn't look up from his phone. I felt it then, that familiar tightening in my chest. But this time I didn't push it down. I let it sit there, heavy and obvious. Is that directed at me? I asked. The room went quiet in that particular way that only families can manage. No one moving, no one breathing too loud, everyone suddenly aware of the walls. My father cleared his throat. Not everything is about you. That sentence used to undo me. It used to make me shrink, apologize, recalibrate. This time, I nodded. Good, I said. Then we're clear. His eyebrows twitched, just slightly. He hadn't expected that. I started reviewing old conversations in my head, but not emotionally, logistically, like a forensic exercise. When had the tone shifted? When had they stopped asking and started assuming? The answer came faster than I liked. It started when my father began talking about future planning, about consolidating accounts, about simplifying paperwork for everyone's sake. I'd helped him organize documents before, tax records, insurance policies, the boring adult stuff families pretend not to think about until they have to. I'd been meticulous, careful, transparent. Too transparent, apparently, because now I could see it. They'd decided that access meant opportunity, and opportunity meant risk. Not for Evan, never for Evan. He was decisive, he was confident, he knew what he was doing. I was cautious, detail-oriented. I asked questions. In my family, that translated to suspicious. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was soft, hesitant, the voice she used when she wanted something without asking for it. I just wanted to check in, she said. I almost laughed. I learned that tone when I was young. It meant, I want information, but I don't want responsibility. I'm fine, I said. A pause, then, your father's been under a lot of stress. There it was. I waited. He feels like things have been misaligned lately. People aren't always upfront. People. Not me, never me. Just people. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even, if you want to ask me something, ask me. Silence stretched. I imagined her in the kitchen, hand on the counter, eyes unfocused. I just think, she said carefully, it might help if you explained things more clearly. You've always been a bit private. Private, another old label, one they'd given me when I stopped volunteering my inner life for inspection. I explain when I'm asked. I don't confess to things I haven't done. She sighed. No one's accusing you. We both knew that wasn't true. That night, I opened my laptop and started pulling records, not because I needed to defend myself, but because something in my gut told me this wasn't just emotional, it was structural, planned, and plans leave trails. Emails, messages, shared documents, calendar invites that didn't include me. The more I looked, the clearer it became. They'd been having conversations without me for months. Decisions that affected me, financial, logistical, even legal, had already been discussed, agreed upon, and partially executed. I wasn't a participant. I was a contingency, a risk to be managed. And then I found it. An email chain forwarded accidentally to an old shared folder my father had forgotten I still had access to. It wasn't dramatic, no insults, no accusations, just assumptions. If something goes wrong, in case she misinterprets, we should protect ourselves. I read the words slowly, my hands steady, my heart pounding loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. They weren't afraid of what I'd done. They were afraid of what I might do, based on a version of me they'd invented years ago and never bothered to update. And in that moment, something important clicked. This wasn't about trust, it was about control slipping. Once I saw that, everything made sense. The coldness, the distance, the sudden narrative shift. They needed me positioned as unreliable before anything actually happened. That way, if something did go wrong, if money was misplaced, if decisions backfired, if blame needed a home, it wouldn't land on them, it would land on me. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the buffer. I didn't confront them. That's the part they never anticipated. They expected tears, explanations, a scramble to regain my place. Instead, I withdrew. Not dramatically, not with ultimatums, just quietly. I stopped offering help, stopped answering questions that weren't direct, stopped filling in emotional gaps no one acknowledged. At family gatherings, I became observant instead of apologetic, and they noticed. My father started watching me more closely, like he was waiting for a reaction he couldn't provoke. My mother grew jumpier, her smiles tight and overcompensating. Evan got sharper, more impatient. Authority doesn't like being ignored. "You've changed," he said, cornering me one evening in the kitchen. "I've adapted," I replied. "To what?" I met his eyes. "Reality." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." That was his favorite word for me. I smiled, small, controlled. "No," I said. "I'm being precise." The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the clarity, because clarity strips away hope. There was no misunderstanding to fix, no apology waiting to be unlocked, no version of this where they suddenly realized their mistake and rushed back with remorse in their hands. They'd made a calculation, and I no longer fit the equation. Late one night, sitting alone in my apartment, I felt the grief finally hit, not as panic, not as rage, but as a dull, aching weight behind my ribs. I mourned the family I thought I had, the trust I'd spent years trying to earn, the version of myself who believed proximity meant safety. I cried quietly, like I always had, careful not to inconvenience anyone, even in solitude. And when it passed, something else remained. Resolve. I started planning, not revenge yet, but independence with teeth. If they wanted distance, I would give it structure. If they wanted control, I would remove access. They underestimated one thing. I might have been the one they doubted, but I was also the one who paid attention, and I kept receipts. By the time my father finally called, weeks later, I was ready. Not to fight, to listen, because people always reveal the truth when they think you're still trying to prove yourself, and I wasn't. Not anymore.
My father called on a Sunday afternoon, the way he always did when he wanted the moral high ground. Sundays were for forgiveness, for family, for pretending the week hadn't left marks. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. I answered on the third try. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to establish control. "We need to talk," he said. Not "I'd like to," not "Are you free?" Need, like a requirement, like an obligation I still owed. "I'm listening," I replied. Another pause. He was recalibrating. He expected defensiveness, softness, a crack he could press on. "This situation," he began, "has gone on long enough." I leaned back against my couch, staring at the blank wall across from me. My apartment was quiet, safe, neutral territory. "I told you you didn't trust me," I said. I accepted that. That wasn't meant to end the conversation, but it did. His breath came sharper now. You can't just disengage from your family. I almost laughed. You disengaged first, I said. You just expected me to chase you afterward. Silence stretched. Thick. Uncomfortable. Then softer, strategic. You've always taken things personally. There it was, the familiar pivot. I'm taking this accurately, I said. That's new for me. We met 2 days later at my parents' house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, to know I wasn't rewriting history in my favor. The house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner and old wood. The familiarity hit me harder than I expected. My mother hugged me like she was afraid I'd disappear if she didn't. My father barely touched me. Evan nodded from the couch, arms crossed, already positioned as witness rather than participant. We sat at the dining table, the oak one, polished and heavy with decades of unspoken rules. My father folded his hands. We've had concerns. I waited. You've been distant, my mother added quickly. Closed off. Evan snorted. Defensive. I looked at each of them in turn. You decided I wasn't trustworthy before you talked to me, so what exactly is this meeting for? My father's jaw tightened. We're trying to understand your behavior. My behavior, I repeated. Or your fear. That landed. For the first time, he looked uncertain. I've reviewed everything. The emails, the decisions made without me, the assumptions. My mother's face drained of color. Evan leaned forward. You went through Dad's files? They were shared with me, I said evenly. I didn't steal anything. That's an important distinction. My father's voice sharpened. This is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. No, I said. This is the result of it. Something shifted then. Not dramatically, not loudly, but I saw it. The moment they realized I wasn't confused anymore. You don't trust me, I said calmly, because trust requires vulnerability, and I see now that makes you uncomfortable. My father scoffed. That's not fair. It's accurate, I replied. You trust Evan because he mirrors you, because he doesn't question, because he fits. Evan stood abruptly. That's bullshit. Sit down, my father snapped. Evan froze, then sat, fuming. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled it back gently. Please don't, I said. Not today. Her eyes filled with tears, real ones. That almost broke me. Almost. I spent my whole life thinking if I explained myself better, if I was more open, more careful, more agreeable, you'd eventually see me as safe. But safety to you means predictable, and I was never allowed to be that. My father exhaled slowly. We've always supported you. You've tolerated me, I said. There's a difference. The room went quiet. And then my father said the thing he didn't mean to say, the thing that cracked everything open. You've always been unsteady, he said. Emotionally, we had to be careful. Unsteady. I felt it then. Not anger, not shock. Grief. Deep, hollow grief for the child I'd been, the one who learned early to self-edit, to manage reactions, to stay small so no one would accuse her of being too much. I was a child, I said softly. I was allowed to be emotional. He looked away. And that was it. That was the moment. Not because he'd admitted guilt, but because he couldn't face it. I stood. My legs felt steady. That surprised me. I won't fight for your trust anymore, I said. I won't defend myself against stories you tell when I'm not in the room. My mother sobbed quietly now. Evan stared at the table. My father said nothing. I'm stepping away, I continued. Not to punish you, to protect myself. That's dramatic, Evan muttered. I turned to him. You've benefited from this dynamic your entire life. Silence suits you. He flinched. I picked up my bag. This is the last conversation where you get access to my inner life. If you reach out again, it will be on new terms, or not at all. My father finally looked at me then. Really looked. You're making a mistake, he said. I smiled, not cruelly, sadly. No, I replied. I'm correcting one. Driving home, I didn't cry. The grief had already done its damage. What I felt instead was emptiness, wide and quiet and strangely peaceful. That night, I blocked Evan. I muted my parents' thread. I removed shared access to everything I'd ever offered freely. And then I slept. Deeply. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life with intention. Not loudly, not performatively. I took a promotion I hadn't told them about, moved money they didn't know existed, updated documents, changed beneficiaries. I stopped waiting for validation from a house that had never been home. The revenge wasn't emotional. It was structural, and it was irreversible. One evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. "We need to talk. We may have been too harsh." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I set the phone down. Some conversations only happen once, and we'd already had ours.
I didn't respond to my father's message. Not out of spite, not to prove a point. I didn't respond because there was nothing left to negotiate. When trust is removed as a weapon, silence becomes a boundary. Life after them wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it didn't arrive with a soundtrack or a dramatic sense of arrival. It settled in quietly, like a new posture I had to learn to hold without slouching back into old shapes. The first thing that changed was my breathing. I didn't realize how much oxygen I'd been rationing until no one was monitoring my lungs. I woke up without that low-grade dread, without the instinctive inventory of what I might have done wrong the day before. I stopped rehearsing explanations in the shower, stopped apologizing mid-sentence for thoughts I hadn't even finished. I became still, and in that stillness, things started to grow. 6 months later, my mother sent a message. "Your father misses you." She didn't say we, she didn't say I, just your father, like he was a weather condition she couldn't control. I read it once, then again. There was no apology attached, no accountability, just longing without ownership. I typed 3 words, "I hope he's well," and that was it. I didn't add warmth, I didn't add distance. I gave exactly what was asked for, and nothing they could twist. They heard about my promotion through Evan. I hadn't announced it, I hadn't posted about it, I didn't need the performance. But success has a way of leaking. Apparently, Evan had found out through a mutual contact and mentioned it at dinner. Apparently, my father had gone quiet. Apparently, my mother had cried. That part came to me secondhand, through an aunt who meant well and didn't realize she was carrying water for a family that had already burned me. "He's proud of you," she said gently. "He just doesn't know how to say it." I smiled politely. Pride after exclusion is not a compliment, it's a consequence. A year passed, then another message came, this time from my father directly. "I've been thinking a lot about where things went wrong." I almost admired the phrasing, so careful, so vague. I waited 3 days before replying, not to punish him, but to make sure my response came from clarity, not reaction. When I finally answered, I chose each word like it would be archived, because it would be. "Nothing went wrong. You made a decision. I respected it." Minutes passed. Then, "That wasn't what I meant." I didn't respond. Meaning is irrelevant once impact has settled. The final confrontation didn't happen in person. It happened at my grandmother's funeral. Families have a way of reassembling around death, pretending grief erases everything that came before it. I stood near the back of the chapel, dressed in black, composed. I hadn't planned on speaking to anyone beyond polite acknowledgments. My father approached me after the service. He looked older, smaller. Regret had lines now. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I loved her," I replied. "That didn't change." He nodded, swallowing. "Can we talk?" I studied his face, the familiar authority softened by something dangerously close to humility. "Here?" I asked. He hesitated. "Maybe somewhere quieter." I shook my head. "This is fine." He exhaled. "I never meant to push you away." "I know," I said, "and I meant it. You just didn't know how to stand beside me without controlling the narrative." He flinched. "I was trying to protect the family," he said. I met his eyes. "From what?" He didn't answer. And that was the answer. My mother hovered nearby, eyes red, hopeful in a way that used to gut me. Evan stood a few rows back, arms crossed, watching like this was an exchange he might still win. I realized then that this moment, the one they'd imagined, hoped for, waited on, was supposed to be my return, my softening, my forgiveness. But I wasn't here to give them that. I don't need an apology, and I don't need reconciliation. My father looked startled. "Then why are you here?" I thought about it. "To close the loop," I said. He nodded slowly. "I miss you." I felt it then, not pain, not anger, but a clean, sharp truth. You miss the version of me that tried to earn your trust. She doesn't exist anymore. My mother gasped softly. Evan looked away. I left before anyone could stop me. Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy, undecided.
I stood on the steps of the chapel for a moment, letting the air fill my lungs. I thought about the message that started it all. We don't trust you anymore. I replied, understood, because I had understood. They thought trust was something they could withdraw to maintain power. They never considered what would happen if I stopped needing it. That night I went home to the life I built, to walls that didn't echo with judgment, to silence that felt like peace, not punishment. I poured a glass of wine, sat on my couch, let the day settle. My phone buzzed once more. A final message from my father. I hope one day you'll forgive us. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, I did. That's why I left. I set the phone down, and for the first time I felt something settle fully into place. Not victory, not revenge. Freedom. They would live with the story they told about me. I would live with the truth. And that was the difference that broke them.